Risk is the new safe. If you want to be safe, take risk. You see, it is a risk not to take risk. And the risk you would regret is the risk you never take. Great evening, guys. Thank you so much for joining us again on another exciting Upgrade Live with Mr. Upgrade. Yes, I'm Mr. Upgrade, and I'm super excited to have you join us here again on another exciting, life transforming time on the Upgrade Live with Mr. Upgrade. Now, on the Upgrade Live with Mr. Upgrade, we do this every Sunday from 7 p.m. through to 8 p.m. and we basically just get to do four things. Yes, four things. That's what we get to do. Number one, we get to take your questions. So if you have any question whatsoever, feel free to ask your questions and we will gladly take them. Number two, we got to share with you the Upgrade Mastery tip for the week. And for this week, the Upgrade Mastery tip is risk. R-I-S-K. Risk, right? And I can't wait for us to get into the conversation because there's so much to unpack on the conversation on risk. Number three is that we get to connect, network, and bond. Now, this is super important because we live in a world today where connecting and networking is very critical. Like I tell people, it's not about who you know, it's about who knows you. And for people to know you, you need to connect, you need to network, and you need to bond. And the fourth thing that we get to do here is that we get to have fun. All of our learnings is laced with fun because we believe that if learning is not fun, there is no learning at all. So we get to also have fun while we learn. So welcome again to the Upgrade Live with Mr. Upgrade. And I am excited for this conversation that we're going to be having today. Before we begin, do well to share the link. So I thank you for joining. But please subscribe, leave a comment, and share the link with others. You have no idea whose life you would just be helping to upgrade simply by sharing the link so that they too can be part of the conversation. Are you excited? I am excited. So I don't know about you, but I hope that you're excited. So on the Upgrade Live, we also begin with our basic 5 questions. Now, these 5 questions help us to lay the foundation for the conversation. It just helps us to build the framework upon which every other thing will be built, right? So we begin with our basic 5 questions that would help you understand where this journey is going, right? So are you ready? Are you excited? Let's begin. Now, question number 1 is, what is risk? Now, you've always heard people talk about, oh, that thing is a risk. Oh, I don't want to take risk. Oh, I'm afraid to take risk. Oh, I'm risk averse. What exactly is risk? Because sometimes when you don't know the meaning of a thing, it affects how you respond to that thing. So it's only important that you get to know what it means. So, what is risk? What is risk? What does it really mean when people say risk? I'll tell you, our definition is always from the upgrade side of life. So you most likely not see it anywhere else. That's why you should pay attention to the things that we do here, right? Now, you see, risk, it is a decision that leads to action, yet full of uncertainty, but has possibility. Did you get that? Risk is a decision that leads to action, yet full of uncertainty, but has possibility. That is risk. Do you understand that? Do you wrap your mind and your head around that? Risk is a decision that leads to action, yet full of uncertainty, but has possibility. That is risk. Question number 2. Who's responsible for risk? Now we know what risk is. Who is now responsible for risk? Now I'll tell you, you are responsible for risk. No one is responsible for risk but you. The risk you take, the risk you don't take is all entirely up to you. Like the saying goes, to be or not to be is entirely up to you. The same way you are responsible for risk. No one else is responsible for risk but you. Question number 3. Now, why risk? Why do we have to talk about risk? Why do we have to look into risk? What is the essence of risk at this time? I'll tell you 3 reasons why risk. Number 1, uncertainty yet possibility. Now, with risk, there's so many uncertainty, right? You don't know what will happen. You don't know the outcome. But yet, with that uncertainty, there are also possibility. So, yes, there is the uncertainty that comes with risk, but yes, there's also the possibility that accompany risk. So you will not know what will happen if you don't take risk. You are also uncertain of the results until you take risk. So one of the reasons why risk is uncertainty yet possibility. The second reason why risk is belief and faith, right? A very key component of risk is that you believe and you have faith. Remember, we said risk is a decision that leads to action. That decision is that you believe. That action is the faith. So, risk, why risk? There is the belief and the faith. That's why you take the risk. Do you understand this? Now, the third reason why risk is progress and impact. You cannot make any significant progress, whether your personal brand or your business, without taking risk. And you cannot see as much impact as you would see if you don't take risk. So the third reason why risk is progress and impact. Right? So these are the 3 reasons why risk. Number 1, uncertainty yet possibility. Number 2, belief and faith. And number 3, progress and impact. Now, question number 4 is, what are the benefits of risk? What are the benefits of risk? What do you stand to gain when you take risk? What are the benefits of risk? Now, I'm going to tell you that there are 3 benefits of risk. There are so many benefits, but I'll share with you just 3 of them, right? Because we like to keep it simple so you can easily remember and put to use, right? 3 benefits of risk. Number 1, you will leave your comfort zone. One of the important benefits of risk is that it gets you out of your comfort zone. Now, let me tell you something about your comfort zone that you may not fully be aware of. Now, your comfort zone is that zone where anything goes, but nothing grows. Do you get that? Your comfort zone is that zone where anything goes, but nothing grows. Right? So you are in that place where you are just stuck. That's your comfort zone. But risk helps you to leave your comfort zone. Second benefit why risk is you take up new challenges. See, the truth is this: nothing would ever make you take up new challenges like risk. It's a new challenge, right? You don't know the outcome. It's a risk, but it helps you to take on new challenges. If you want to take on new challenges in your life, you need to take risk. Literally, you need to take risk. That's how you take on new challenges. The third benefit of risk is that there are rewards. There's always the reward you gain when you take risk. There are rewards. You don't stand to lose anything when you take risk. In fact, you stand to gain so much when you take risk. There are always rewards for risk. There are always rewards for risk. You win, you learn. There are rewards for risk. There are no losses in risk. You either win or you learn. So these are three benefits of risk. Number one, you leave your comfort zone. Number two, you take up new challenges. Number three, they are rewards. Right? Now, question number five, when is the best time to take risk? When is the best time to take risk? Like I always say, the last best time to take risk was yesterday. Like yesterday was the last best time to take risk. The next best time to take risk is now. Now, this very moment is the next best time for you to take risk. And the question is, are you ready to take risk? That's the question I want to ask you. Are you ready to take risk? Or you still want to remain in your comfort zone where anything goes but nothing grows? It's up to you to now decide. You see, your level of growth is determined by the risk you are willing to take. I'll take that again. Your level of growth is determined by the risk you are willing to take. So, what are the risks that you are willing to take? It will show your level of growth. Is this making sense to you now? And you will never really know the outcome of a risk until you take the risk. You will never really know the outcome until you take the risk. So, my question to you now is, are you ready to take risks? Or you just want to remain the way you have always been? It's up to you. Because trust me, you can't go to next level without you taking any risk. You can't. You're always going to remain where you have always been until you take a risk. So now let's talk about risk itself. RISK, a four-letter word, but very, very important, right? Every day of our lives, we take risk. Every single day, right? From you eating your food, to you leaving your house, to you driving your car, for you getting to work. Everything that you do, everything that happens in your day has a level of risk attached to it. Everything. When you're eating at the eatery, you're taking a risk because you don't even know how the food was prepared. You don't know if you're going to be poisoned. It's a risk. When you're flying on air, you're taking a risk because you're entrusting your life to the pilot. You don't know if he's having a good day or whatever, right? So there's nothing that you literally do that doesn't have a level of risk attached to it. So everything you do, in one way or another, has risk revolved around it. So it makes no sense when you are afraid to take risk. And some people say, oh, the risk, you have to take calculated risk. Risk is risk. Calculated risk is just a mild way of making it look okay, you should do it. Risk is risk. Right? Risk is risk. Whether calculated or uncalculated, risk is risk. And life itself is a risk. Life itself is a risk. And that's why I started out by saying risk is the new safe. If you want to be safe, take risk. Literally, if you want to be safe, take risk. Nothing will make you safe like when you take risk. So risk is the new safe. Now let's look at risk. RISK. Simple. Risk. The R in risk is responsibility. which helps you realize that nobody will take risk for you, right? If at all they are taking risk on your behalf, it's because there's a certain level of benefit that they get from that risk. That's why they're taking it. Nobody would take risk for you. So which means risk is your responsibility. And I told you earlier, the level of your growth is determined by the risk you are willing to take. So it's your responsibility. Let's say you want to be a podcaster, for example, right? Or a YouTuber, for example. You have to take up the responsibility to create content, to show up consistently, and to keep delivering on your craft, facing the risk of being rejected, of being not accepted, and of being not having subscribers or listeners. Those are the risks. Is this making sense? Right? So you need to understand this, that every risk begins with you taking responsibility. You want to change your life? Fantastic. But are you ready to take the responsibility for that change? You want to become a better person? Oh, great. But are you ready for the responsibility to become that person? Are you understanding this? So there is no risk that doesn't involve you taking responsibility. You know, the four lepers who were outside the camp of the Syrian army while there was famine in Israel, they told themselves, why sit we here and die? Like, why sit we and die? You see that story in 2 Kings chapter 7. They said, why sit we here and die? If we stay here, we will die. If we go to the enemy's camp, perhaps they will kill us. But why sit we here and die? And they took the responsibility to start walking towards the enemy's camp. That was a risk. Yet it was when they took that risk that God amplified the sound of their feet, that it sounded like a marching army, and the enemies fled the camp. So by the time they arrived at the camp, it was an empty camp with all the goodies left behind. But if they did not take that responsibility, they actually would have remained there and died of famine. Because that famine was so severe that people were killing their children to eat. See this, guys. Every risk demands responsibility from you. You are responsible for the risk you are willing to take. They're responsible. No one is responsible for any risk that you will take, but you are the one that is responsible. So if you don't take risks, no problem. You're just going to remember where you've always been. But if you take risks, you're going to determine the level of growth that you experience. So the R in risk is responsibility. So it starts with you. You see that the change you want to see begins with you. Be the change you want to see. That's responsibility. That's where risk begins from. It begins with responsibility. The R in risk is impact. Every risk that you take has an impact. Do you understand? There is no risk without impact. Why those four lepers took the risk to go to the enemy's camp? The impact was their feet sounded like a marching army, and the enemies fled the camp. That was the impact. So by the time they arrived at the enemy's camp was deserted. Yet all their goodies were left behind. So there is a great and significant impact that taking risk has on your life. There are things that will not happen for you if you don't take risk. That's the impact of risk. There's certain things that will not happen for you until you take risk. There are certain doors that will not open for you until you take risk. There are certain opportunities that will not be accessible to you until you take risk. So there's always the impact of risk. There's always the impact of risk. There's always the impact of risk. So you must get comfortable with taking risks because it has impact. Risk is impacting. It's never going to leave you the same way. Something must change when you take risk. That's the impact of risk. Something must change. You become better, you become more competent. Something must change when you take risk. Something has to change. The S in risk is sacrifice. Every risk will demand sacrifice, right? Every risk will push you. Every risk would get you out of your comfort zone. Every risk will determine that you stretch, right? Every risk will determine that you do something that you are not used to, that is not necessarily convenient for you. It requires sacrifice. Like I always say most of the time, that if you want to be satisfied, you must make sacrifice. Risk would demand sacrifice. So there's a sacrifice you have to make. That's what show that you are taking the risk. Let's say you have the risk to be a person of value. You may have to make the sacrifice of not being available to everyone, of not being everywhere. You have to make the sacrifice of going to learn, practice, train, so that you can be of value. You must make the sacrifice. You must be willing to go the extra mile so that you can become a person of value. So that's the sacrifice you have to make. Otherwise, you risk being of no value to anyone. Scripture says that if the salt has loses its savour, of what will it be used anymore? What will be its saltness if it has lost its savour? So please understand this. It's very important that you understand this because every risk involves sacrifice. And we live in a world where people want to have the benefits of sacrifice without making sacrifice. It's just strange. People want the benefits of sacrifice without making sacrifice. They want the benefits of risk without taking risk. It doesn't happen anywhere. You can't get the rewards of risk without you taking risk because no one can take risk on your behalf. No one can take risk on your behalf. So the S in risk is sacrifice. You know, Peter told Jesus that, Master, we have left everything to follow you. What is our reward? Like, we've sacrificed everything to follow you. What is our reward? And Jesus told them that everything you sacrifice to follow me, in this life you will get 100-fold. And the world to come, eternal life. But guess what? While Jesus ascended in the book of Acts, guess what? The people said they took notes that these ones had been with Jesus. So you see, that risk of sacrificing their time to be with Jesus began to show up in their lives. You can't get the rewards that comes from risk without making the sacrifice of risk. It's not possible. It's not possible. The K in risk is no. See, one of the things that happen when you take risk is that you get to know, right? At the end of risk, you have a certain level of knowledge you did not have before you took the risk. Are you getting this? At the end of risk, you have a certain level of knowledge you did not have before taking the risk. So look at your life. Look at some of the risks that you've taken in your life. The things you now know as a result of the risk, you did not know before the risk. So at the end of risk is that you know. So the K in risk is that you now know. Risk opens you up to a new level of knowledge. Risk exposes you to something you now know that you did not know before. So you see why it is important that you take risk. Because when it comes to risk, like I told you earlier, you don't lose. You either win or you learn. Why? Because at the end of every risk, you know. You don't lose. When it comes to risk, you don't lose. You don't lose. You get to know. So this is what risk is about. RISK. Responsibility, impact, sacrifice, and know. This is risk. And like I told you earlier, you never really know the outcome of a risk until you take the risk. You never know the outcome until you take the risk. See this, guys. People are afraid to take risk until risk becomes the only option available. Does this make sense? Some people are afraid to take risk until risk becomes the only option that is available. So at that point, they realize that it's either they take the risk or nothing else for them. But you don't have to get to that stage where risk now becomes your only option. Because sometimes life will push you towards that point. It's wisdom to take risk now before life pushes you to that point. See, life is a risk. And the best way to live life is to take risk. Life is a risk. Life is a risk. The best way to live life is to take risk. Holding yourself back from taking risk is not the way to go. It's not the way to live. It's not. The best way to live life is to take risk. And to take risk early so that life don't get you to a point where risk becomes the only option. Because if you're not serious with life, life is serious with you. Life will be serious with you if you're not serious with life. Life will push you to that point where risk becomes your only option. Don't get to that point. Take risk. Take risk now. Take risk early. Don't get to that point where taking risk becomes the only option. But if you choose not to do willingly, life will get you to that point forcefully. Because what is life without risk? Life itself is a risk. Life itself is a risk. See, there are three things about risk that you must know. Three things about risk that you must know. Number one, there is trust. Number two, there is conviction. Number three, there's possibility. These are three things about risk that you must know. Anyone who's going to take risks, you need these three things are always present while you take those risks. There is trust, there is conviction, and there's possibility. So to take the risk, it shows that somehow, there's this level of trust that you have. Somehow, there's this conviction that you have. Somehow, there's this possibility that you have. That's why you take the risk. So those four lepers in 2 Kings chapter 7, who said to themselves, why sit we here and die? Was because they trust that, what's the worst that can happen? They had the conviction that it's better off for them to go towards the enemy's camp than to remain where they were. And they had the possibility. And what's come to what? They may just give us food because after all, we are lepers. We are not part of the army, so we are lepers. They may just help us. Besides, by being lepers, we were already ostracized from the community of other people. They were at the city outskirts. That's why they were left. That's where they were. So you see, three things about risk that you must always know: there's trust, there's conviction, and there's possibility. So while you sit back and say, oh, I'm going to take this risk, the reason why you can say that is because somehow you have the trust, you have the conviction, you have the possibility. That's why you take the risk. Otherwise, you won't take the risk. You wouldn't. And that's enough to propel you to take risks. Trust, conviction, possibility. It's enough to make you want to take risks. In fact, it is more than enough. Those three things: trust, conviction, possibility. But see these guys, there are two traits of risk. And what are the two traits of risk? Anyone who takes risk, you will always notice these two traits in their lives. And what are these two traits of risk? Number one, decision. Number two, action. Now, if you remember our definition of risk, we told you that risk, it is a decision that leads to action, yet full of uncertainty, but has possibility. So the two traits of risk: one, decision; two, action. Anyone who takes risks, you will notice these two things about them. Quick to make decision, they're quick to take action. Those guys, the four lepers said to themselves, why sit we here and die? They made a decision, and then they took action. They actually started walking towards the enemy's camp. Right? You say you want to get some things done, you decide, you do it. This is the trait of risk: decision, action. And if you notice, the people who don't take risks, they are always suffering from indecision and inaction. People who don't take risks, they are always suffering from indecision and inaction. They are too late to decide, they never act. The hallmarks of people who don't take risks. But the people who take risk, decision and action are their hallmarks. What is the goal of risk? The one goal of risk is faith. That's the goal. The whole essence of risk is faith. Like literally, the whole essence of risk is faith. Because the reason why you take risks is because somewhere deep down, you have the faith in what you're about to do. No one who takes risk that does not have faith. You may not say it, but you have it. That's why you take the risk. because you have the faith that it will work. You have the faith that it will align to the way you expect. No one takes risk without faith. The goal of risk is faith. The goal of risk is faith. Let me tell you this. Life changes the moment you dare to take risk. Your life will change the moment you dare to take risk. The essence of this conversation today is to dare you to take risk. There's some things you know you should have been doing. There's some things that have been dropped in your heart that you know you should be doing, but you have been hesitating, procrastinating. This conversation is a reminder and a push that you need to take that risk. I dare you to take the risk. I dare you. See, your life will change the moment you dare to take risk. The moment you dare to take risk. So this is a reminder and a wake-up call. That risk, go take it. You don't lose when you take risk. You only win or learn. So go take it. Go take it. If this is the only thing you gain from this session, I'm good. Go take the risk. Make that phone call. Send that email. Reach out to that person. Take the risk. Take the risk. What's the worst that would happen? Like I told you, you don't lose when you take risk. You only win or you learn. So go take the risk. Because you will not change your life if you don't dare to take risk. You will not. And you see, people are risk averse because of three things: fear of failure, uncertainty, and preservation. That's why people are risk averse. They don't want to take risks because they fear failure, they have uncertainty, and they want preservation. See, in your mind is designed to keep you from taking risk. Why? Because your mind works to preserve you. So it tries to stop you from taking any risk. It tries to leave you where you're already comfortable with. But the truth is this: what you are currently comfortable with right now was uncomfortable with, you were uncomfortable with it at some point. That's to tell you how your mind deceives you to keep you small. Why? Because it's designed to preserve you. And that's why people are risk averse. You are fear of failure. What if I fail? The question is, what if you succeed? You have uncertainty. Yes, uncertainty is good because what is certain now used to be uncertain before. Preservation. Just want to keep it small, just want to keep it little, don't want to let it be the best that it can be. No, no. That's the reason why you are risk averse. Your fear of failure, your uncertainty, and preservation. You know, people always use this, what's the word now? Proverb. They say a bird in hand is worth nine in the bush. Some other people say a bird in hand is the very bird. But the truth is, that quote many times stop you from taking risk. It's actually because you went out, you actually got the bird that was in hand. What tells you that there are not much more out there? If you can get the one that is in hand, what tells you that there are not more that you can also get? But in trying to preserve yourself, you say, no, a bird in hand is the very bird. No! A bird in hand tells you that there are more birds. It tell that there are more beds. She's not the only one. There are more. All the time we teach here, we tell people there is always more. There's always more. Don't restrict yourself or limit yourself. There is always more. Why? Because we know there's always more. See these guys. You must realize that great things only happen when people take risks to do great things. Great things only happen when people take risk to do great things. I've told you before, nothing great ever comes out from the seat of comfort. Great things happen when people take risk to do great things. So you cannot be great if you don't take the risk to do great things. You cannot be great. You must realize this. People are more accustomed to the risk of failure than they are to the risk of success. It's just funny how people have accustomed themselves to the risk of failure than the risk of success. Oh, they keep saying, oh, what if I fail? The question is, what if you succeed? Get accustomed to the risk of success than the risk of failure. What if it doesn't work? What if it works? You need to change what you're accustomed to. What if it works? What if it works? Move away from those people who are accustomed to the risk of failure and find the association of those people who are accustomed to the risk of success. Because the truth is, many of the things that you are afraid of will never happen. In fact, science says 80% of the things that you are afraid of never happens. So of what use is that fear? What use? If 80% of the things you are afraid of will never happen, that's a scientific fact. See, obeying God's instruction is a big risk, but a worthy risk. You see, God will give you instruction of what to do. Obeying it is a big risk, but it is a worthy risk. It is. Abraham in Genesis 12 was told to come out of his father's house, to come out from his nativity to a land that God will show him. That was a big risk, but it was a worthy risk. Scripture reminds us in Hebrews that Abraham left not even knowing where he was going. He was looking for a city that had foundations, whose builder and maker is God. Obeying God's instruction is a big risk. But it's a worthy risk. Over the weekend, I was watching a short video on Instagram about a man of God who, while he was preaching, he got the leading to pause his message and get into a praise session. And while they were doing the praise session, the people he asked to come out to dance, when they came out, he took the risk to say that there are people that have come out that God had laid in the hearts of people who were in the congregation to bless the people who had come out. In fact, they usually said they should go pick somebody in the congregation who God had laid in their heart to bless during the service. So imagine if he did not take that risk to actually pause his message, get into a praise session, and then tell the people what they should do at that time, which is If God has laid in your heart to bless somebody, go reach out to that person in the service and bring the person out. See, guys, no caps. Obeying God's instruction is a big risk. You know, when Jesus told the servant, whatsoever he tells you to do, do it. In John chapter 2, right? When Mary told the servant that whatever Jesus tells them to do, they should do it, that was a big risk. The servants were going to fill the pots that had wine now with water. That was a big risk. But guess what? That was a risk that was worth taking. That was a risk that was worth taking. It was a risk worth taking. See this, right? Something that you need to know. There are biblical examples of risk, and I'll share with you a few. You know, when Abraham was told to offer Isaac in Genesis chapter 22, right? God called unto Abraham and said, Abraham, take your son, your only son, the one whom thou lovest, and take him to Mount Moriah and offer him to me as a sacrifice. And that journey took 3 days. So Abraham had enough time to contemplate whether to change his mind or not. 3 days journey. At some point in the journey, Isaac asked the father, Abraham, he says, Father, we have the fire, we have the wood. Where is the ram? And Abraham said, the Lord will provide himself a ram, knowing fully well that Isaac was the ram. Isaac was the sacrifice. Remember when I told you earlier that risk involves sacrifice? Yeah. Abraham got to the mountain, prepared the altar, and tied his own son, the one he had waited for 25 years for, and put him on the altar and took out his knife and was about to kill him. And then God says, Stop. God says, Stop. Say, by this I know. And in blessings, I will bless you. In multiplication, I will multiply you. Literally, Abraham was willing to take the risk to kill his son that he had waited for, the promise he had waited for. Because we read again in Hebrews when Abraham said that he believed in the God who was able to bring back Isaac from the dead. So he knew that even if he had killed Isaac, Isaac would come back to life. That was a clue of the resurrection. Another risk in scripture was Isaac. In Genesis 26, there was famine in the land. And God told Isaac to stay in the land and not to move, not to go elsewhere. Just like our situations are in the country. We live in Nigeria. I know it's a very difficult time right now in Nigeria. And people are finding ways to live. They call it jackpot. Finding ways to live. And then in that kind of situation, God tells you to stay and not go anywhere. That's a risk. But that's a worthy risk. Isaac stayed in the land, Genesis 26, and sowed, which means he continued to do what he knows to do in the land. And in that same year of famine, he reaped 100-fold that nations around started to envy one man. How is that possible? He took the risk, which is a worthy risk. So you see, obeying God is a risk. Obeying God is a risk, but it is a worthy risk. It's a risk worth taking. So God may lay it in your heart to do some certain things for some certain people. It's a risk. But trust me, it's a risk worth taking. Because one thing I'm certain of is this. You may not reap where you sow, but you always reap what you sow. Because a lot of people say, oh, if I'm doing this for somebody, you must do it back for me. No, 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 no. Let that out of your mind. Just let that go. You may not reap where you sow, but you will always reap what you sow. You reap what you sow. Galatians 6:7. Be not deceived. God is not mocked. Whatsoever a man sows, the same shall he reap. It's what you sow. Not necessarily about where you sow, but what you're sowing. You see the risk of Joshua marching and his troops marching around the walls of Jericho. See, the idea of how gigantic those walls are was the fact that Rahab's house was on the wall. Like Rahab's house was not in the city, oh. Their house was on the wall of Jericho. That's how gigantic those walls were. Now, marching around those walls, and the enemies were inside the wall, right? Inside the city. The enemies could literally see the Israelites marching around the wall. They could have taken stones and hauled those stones at them. Joshua took the risk of marching around the wall. Just marching around. Now, in battle, that is not a strategy to apply because now you made yourself known to your enemy. The element of surprise is gone. But yet, that was the risk Joshua was told to take, march around the wall each day for 7 days. You also see the risk where Elisha stays by this time tomorrow. Food will be cheap and everybody will have excess and surplus. Yet, at the time of saying that, there was a great famine that people were killing their children to eat. First, they were eating animal dung, and then they started to kill their children to eat. Yet, Elisha showed up and said, by this time tomorrow, food will be cheap. A bag of barley will be for 2 shekels. Food will be cheap. And the economic advisor of the king says, even if God opened the windows of heaven, what you have said will not be possible. And Elisha told him that you would see it, but you will not partake of it. These are biblical examples of risk. Another example was the 3 lepers who said, why sit we here and die? I told you that earlier. Why sit we here and die? That was the risk. That was a risk. David facing Goliath, that was a risk. Even King Saul told David, this man had been a warrior from his youth. You are only just a youth. That's a risk. That's a risk. But it's a risk worth taking. Remember the 3 Hebrew boys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? That's another risk. Scripture tells us in Daniel chapter 3 that the men who heated up the fire 7 more times, they died from the heat. So they've literally seen the impact of the fire. The men who heated it up 7 more times died from the heat. Yet, this 3 voice says, O king, I'm not careful to answer you in this matter. Even if the God that we serve do not deliver us, we will still not bow. That's a risk. Knowing fully well that the same God that they are relying on had allowed them to be taken away from Israel into captivity in Babylon. Like, do you understand it? God was there when they captured them from Israel and brought them to Babylon as captive. Yet, that's the God that they said that even if he does not deliver us, even if he allows us to roast inside this fire, rather roast. See, what risk are you afraid of taking? What risk are you afraid of taking? This conversation is a wake up call. Go take that risk. The supernatural you want to see is at the other side of risk. Is at the other side of risk. Go take that risk. Go take that risk. See, nothing expresses your faith like risk. Nothing. Nothing literally expresses your faith like risk. So, what shows that you have faith is the risk that you take. Remember, I told you earlier, the goal of risk is faith. And what shows that you truly have faith is the risk that you take. Because nothing expresses your faith like risk. Nothing else. The one who can't take risk lacks faith. That's the best way to say it. The one who cannot take risk does not have faith. The one who can't take risk doesn't have faith. Because faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. By it, the elders obtained a good report. Hebrews 11:1. Faith. Right? The one who cannot take risk does not have faith. Full stop. You see, in one of our books, The Upgrade Culture, one of the culture we talked about in that book is the culture of risk and faith. The culture of risk and faith. And I encourage you to get that book. It will truly bless you. The culture of risk and faith. You discover more about it in that book, The Upgrade Culture. Right? You can send a DM to request a copy of the book, The Upgrade Culture. It will expose your mind, especially on the culture of risk and faith. See, guys, the difference in people comes down to the risk they take. Nothing separates people other than the risk they take. Nothing. The difference in people comes down to the risk that they take. So the question I still want to ask you is, are you ready to take risk? Because nothing will change for you until you take risk. Nothing. Literally, nothing. Things are going to remain the same for you until you take risk. Nothing is going to change about you until you take risk. See, when you take risk, this is what happens to you. There's innovation and growth in your life when you take risk. When you take risk, there is learning and development that happens for you. When you take risk, you have increased confidence when you take risk. When you take risk, you improve your decision making, right? When you take risk, you have enhanced resilience. You don't back down. This is why it's important that you take risk. Very important. Everyone has their risk muscle, right? The more you take risk, the more you strengthen your risk muscle. The more you take risk, the more you toughen your risk muscle. Everyone has a risk muscle. You see it, right? You see it when you have your muscle. Everyone has their risk muscle. The more you take risks, the more you toughen it and strengthen it. And the less you take risk, the more that risk muscle become plastic. You see, what many people don't realize is the opportunity that comes with risk. There's always the opportunity that comes with risk. When you take risk, it opens you up to another level of opportunity that you were not having access to before you took the risk. And you see, risk teaches valuable life lessons, whether you win or you learn. Risk teaches valuable life lessons. Remember, I told you, you don't lose when you take risk. You either win or you learn, and both are valuable life lessons. Valuable life lessons. See, there are disadvantages to risk. I would also tell you that. There are some disadvantages to risk. But the advantages outweighs the disadvantages. So if you put it on a scale, the advantages are there, the disadvantages are here, the advantages are here. So you see, the advantages outweigh the disadvantage. They're not on the same pedestal. The advantage higher, disadvantage lower. And the truth is this: nothing will push you to do more like risk. Nothing will push you to do more like risk. Nothing else. Nothing will push you to do more like risk. Now, there are three C's of risk I want you to always remember. Three C's of risk. The first C is courage. The second C is creativity. The third C is competence slash confidence. These are the three C's of risk. There's courage, there's creativity, and there's competence slash confidence. So it's very important that you know this about risk. Risk will give you courage. Risk will give you creativity. Risk will give you competence and confidence. So because David had killed the lion and the bear, he had courage. He was creative. He did not take the sword of King Saul. Instead, he picked 5 smooth stones, creativity, for his sling. And then he had the competence to face Goliath and told Goliath, I will take off your head from your shoulder today. And there was no sword in David's hand. He had the confidence. He charged towards Goliath. You must always remember this when you're taking risks, because it will give you courage, creativity, and competence slash confidence when you take risks. You see, on the road of self-discovery, you must go through the streets of risk. In discovering yourself as a person, you must go through the street of risk. You must take risk while you're discovering yourself. Because you cannot truly discover yourself outside of risk. You can't. You can't. So on that road of self-discovery, you go through the streets of risk. And you must realize that personal development is a risk, but it's a risk that is worth taking. It's the risk that helps you to upgrade. So take that risk and get yourself involved in your personal development. Remember, risk is your responsibility. No one will take risk for you. No one will develop you for you. No one. So personal development is a risk that is worth taking because it helps you upgrade. Because as you develop yourself, you become the best version of yourself. You see, nothing eliminate what if, like taking risk. If you want to eliminate what if in your life, take risk. Just take risk. Then people will say, what if, what if, what if? See, to eliminate what if in your life, take risk. Because nothing would eliminate what if like taking risk. Like I told you, what if you succeed instead of thinking, what if you fail? Nothing remove the what if like take risk. So when you take the risk, you now know the outcome. You never have to be bothered with what if. Because your biggest regret many times will come from the risk that you could have taken that you did not take. Right? Your biggest regret when you look back in your life and like, you're going to regret the risk you should have taken that you did not take. That will be your biggest regret. You're not going to regret the risk that you took that didn't work out. You regret the risk that you did not take. That's why I tell people all the time, your biggest regret won't come from the risk you take. It will come from the risk you did not take. That's where your biggest regret will come. From the risk that you did not take, not the risk that you take. So if I were you, to save yourself from regrets in the future, take risk. You won't regret the risk you take. You will always regret the risk you did not take. So take risk and save yourself of that regret. Nobody lets you in on what is possible like risk. Only risk lets you in on what is possible when you take risk. Because there's so much possibility, even though it has so much uncertainty. So much possibility, even though it has so much uncertainty. Risk stretches your dreams, it stretches your potential, it stretches your possibility. Risk is a stretcher, it stretches you. It stretches you. And the truth is that your life is designed to be stretched. Your life is designed to be stretched. Interestingly, very few things make for an interesting story, an interesting memory, and an interesting experience like risk. There are very few things that will give you an interesting story, an interesting memory, and an interesting experience like risk. So risk is worth it. It's worth it. You look back at the risk and you have a story from it. You have a memory from it. You have an experience from it just by taking risk. And the truth is this, there are no guarantees with risk. It could lead you to the thrill of victory or to the agony of defeat. But avoiding risk altogether leads to a petty, dull life. So, my question again, are you ready to take risk? In fact, it shouldn't be, are you ready? You should be taking risk. Because at this point, you should be taking risk. So, take risk. Take risk. Risk is the new safe. You want to be safe, like I know you want, go ahead and take risk. You will be glad you did. So, guys, I want to appreciate you for joining us on this conversation. I know it has been worth your while. I know it. I know it like I know my name. It has been worth your while. All right. I want to take a few comments. Someone said the risk you're willing to take show your level of growth. Thank you so much for that. Everything you do has a level of risk attached to it. So true. Right? Risk exposes you to a new level of knowledge. So true. Right? The best way to live life is to take risk early. Yes, early. Take risk early. And the one goal of risk is faith. Yep. Thank you so much for all those comments, right? Now, like we always tell you guys, three things will happen for you in this new week, right? Number one, increased voice of God. Number two, open heavens over your life. And number three, more angelic activities in all that you do. Remember, we always say there's always more on the upgrade side of life. So we encourage you to leave good behind so that you can upgrade. And what better way to upgrade than to take risk? So guys, go take risk. Thank you so much for watching. God bless you.